Hello, welcome to Talking Rubbish, a weekly podcast delving deep into the world of recycling and discussing the truth behind snappy headlines and one-sided stories. I'm James Piper, author of The Rubbish Book, and I'm joined by Robbie Staniforth, my far from rubbish friend. And we are joined today by Alice Rackley from Polytag, our far from rubbish guest. Hello, Robbie. How are you doing today?
Hey, good. Very excited to be getting another interview. Really interested to hear what Alice has to say about Polytag.
Yeah, I'm excited too. We built this one up over a couple of weeks because we're super interested in invisible barcodes, aren't we? We'll have to ask Alice what she calls them because people say digital watermarks, invisible barcode. I don't know. We'll have to find out what they're actually called. But they are just amazing things. And hopefully you've had the opportunity to listen to last week's episode. So the first thing we're going to say is if you've come here just to listen to Alice, which we would not blame you for, the best thing to do is definitely to just go back and listen to episode 24 first, because it's such a good background to this topic, or we think it's a good background to this topic. I mentioned last week we had a few additions and corrections, so it's probably worth just doing a quick intro, if that's okay, Robbie, before we get Alice on the call. Is that all right?
Sure thing. Is this pointing out what Robbie's got wrong again? I'm sure it is.
Let me just have a little look. No, I don't think there's anything in here that Robbie's got wrong. That's great.
Oh, okay, great. I'll make a change.
It's actually me, first of all. I managed to cause a bit of an online backlash just before Christmas. I don't know if you saw this, but on X, Elon Musk had put out an X or a tweet.
Yes.
I'm never getting used to it. And what he'd done is shared a video, right? He'd shared this video of I'm not sure, it was like a Greenpeace video. It was and it was basically, the crux of it was recycling's pointless with a bit of a skew to plastic. And Elon, in his wisdom, just decided to X the three words, recycling is pointless. Now, obviously that's going to get our backs up, right? We do a recycling podcast. He's basically calling our podcast pointless. So I had to put something on LinkedIn. So I put this up saying, isn't it weird that a man who's, and bear in mind, I've had a Tesla since 2017. So I'm like, I'm not a fan of Elon, but I'm a big fan of the companies and SpaceX and all the things that they're doing. So, I have to balance the individual from the organizations. But I put up this thing saying, isn't it crazy that someone who basically has created companies that recycle car batteries because they recycle them into storage batteries and reuses rockets is out there saying recycling's pointless? Isn't that weird? Oh my goodness. The backlash was insane.
Oh, really?
It's my best LinkedIn post I've ever done. I got 118,000 views at the time we're recording this. I got 364 reactions and 194 comments, and I, for the first time in my life, experienced true trolling.
Okay, and have you trolled through all 194 comments, or have you given up?
I think at some point I just had to enjoy Christmas. But it was super fascinating because what was interesting about this post is most people were commenting, we agree, and then some people were coming in and saying, well, we don't agree, because what you have to do is take the context of the video and then apply these three words, recycling is pointless, over the top. And I was like, I just have to disagree. If someone shares I was trying to think of an analogy. If someone shares the Coca-Cola Christmas truck ad and says, I hate Christmas, I'm not sat there going, oh, yeah, they hate Christmas, but they sort of like it because they shared the ad. It's really important on social media, right? Particularly if you're someone like Elon Musk, it's really important that you provide the context in your tweet or X, because the reality is what I saw, loads of those people, millions of people who saw that won't have watched the video. They saw three words that said recycling is pointless. And if all the people commenting on my post were true and they were saying, well, actually, he was talking about plastic, then he should have said plastic recycling is pointless. Then we could have had a debate about that.
Words are important, Elon.
Yeah, and lots of people were commenting saying, but what he's actually saying, if you watch the video, what he's actually saying is recycling is pointless and we should be consuming less. It's like, okay, great. So say recycling is pointless and we should be consuming less. Anyway, rant over. I just was fascinated in how social media works and that experience that I had for the first time in my career, where I felt like actually I'd put something out there that was getting quite a lot of engagement in a negative way, and that was just quite interesting to experience and think about. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh, very good.
And then I've got two additions and corrections, Robbie, that are going to make us feel like our podcast has grown significantly.
Oh, great. Well up for those.
Yeah, sometimes you have these moments where you're like, oh, wow, we really have grown. This is amazing. So the first one is, back in episode 21, we had a bin. Do you remember we launched bin spotters? Mm-hmm. And we had Denise at Cambridge University who'd spotted a bin.
Oh, yes.
And on the bin it said...
That's right, yeah. Poorly labelled bin.
Exactly. It said resource recovery, and then it had lots of info about what you shouldn't put in there.
Yeah, was it dry mixed recyclables, etc.?
Well, straight after that episode went out, Ben, who's the environment manager at Cambridge University, WhatsApped me to say, I can tell you all about this bin.
Oh, so really?
Like, this is amazing. We have someone who presumably goes to the university querying the bin. And then straight away, we had the environment manager come back explaining how the bin works. So I thought we'd just fill in some of the blanks that we had. So he said they called the bin resource recovery because back when they did the tender, they'd had issues with the previous contract and they'd had general waste and DMR bins. And we've talked about DMR, which is dry mixed recycling. So it doesn't mean a lot to people. So they wanted to move away from that.
Yep.
They were finding lots of recycling in the general waste bin.
Mm-hmm.
So what they decided to do was have a 3-bin system, one for food, one for wet waste from the labs, and then one for everything else. And everything else would go to a Smurf for class-leading segregation. That was what they were aiming for. The main driver, he said, was to ensure the food waste went to AD. That was the main thing. They wanted to send the food waste to anaerobic digestion and didn't want to spoil the things that could be sorted. So It's interesting. We do see this a lot where organisations go, focus on the food because that's the thing that's going to contaminate your recycling. Then do all your recycling mixed and send it to an amazing MRF.
Okay.
And they called it, and they wanted a recycling rate of 80%. So this was their aim in terms of doing these bins. So the term resource recovery was chosen because they actually felt if you called it a recycling bin, that would be disingenuous. It wouldn't be true because they were asking for lots of stuff. They were asking for everything, basically. And they were saying, we're just going to go and sort this.
So did he then say where those resource recovery things went?
Yeah, so the resource recovery went off to a MRF.
Oh, okay.
And I think they said they were getting about 60% recycling rate from the MRF, which is fairly typical. That kind of percentage is fairly typical when you are just combining loads of stuff together and you're not being specific about what to put in the bin.
Yeah.
So
not terrible considering that they're just saying bung everything but food and scientific waste in this bin.
Yes. And I think they found the communication quite hard on this actually. As we said in our episode, they focused on the messaging being about what shouldn't go in the bin. And even with all this communication campaign, even with all this work, they felt that actually the staff and students were not convinced that the waste would actually be sorted. You know, once you're putting a load of stuff into a bin, you're saying resource recovery, people are like, oh, I'm not actually sure that's going to happen. We hear that all the time.
Yeah.
So Ben's basically looking at this at the moment. He would like to see more segregation. And so we're going to talk about simpler recycling soon, Robbie, which is how you split waste out and DEFRA are basically advising how companies split waste out and organisations have to do that. I think is it from April this year?
Yeah, that's right. That's when it starts.
So organisations are going to have to collect segregated waste. We'll talk about that another time. But obviously that's something that Ben's looking at. So they're looking at a new system to segregate more of their waste. So it was great to hear from him and great to hear the information and fill in those gaps.
Wow, amazing that we had a listener who knew exactly about the topic we were talking about. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and do you want to know our second thing that made me feel like we've grown?
Go on then.
So this was about DRS. Again, we talked about DRS in episode 23, and I mentioned that I used to live in Copenhagen and that Copenhagen used to be quite, from when I was there, you buy all your drinks in glass bottles, you take it all back, they'd wash it.
Yep.
And I got the impression that DRS wasn't used as much as back then, and perhaps there was less glass and more plastic that was going through that system.
Yeah.
And I asked anyone from Copenhagen to reach out to me, and I got an amazing text chain from John. So thank you so much, John. Honestly, within minutes of the episode going out.
Really?
And John, actually, his first text was him jumping off the train while listening to our episode to get a photo of a bin, presumably then to jump back on the train.
Oh, brilliant.
So it was true dedication. Anyway, the DRS in Copenhagen is the PANT system, P-A-N-T.
Yes, I've seen it on the back of bottles. Yeah, P-A-N-T. Yeah, even ones that you see in the UK sometimes.
Yeah, things that they sell in multiple countries, you might see that word P-A-N-T.
Yeah.
And he talks about all these different collection infrastructures. So we talked about the fact that small corner shops might have something to collect up bottles, and they have that in Copenhagen. Then they have retail reverse vending machines. So in a bigger supermarket, you'll have a vending machine. They also have dedicated DRS collection centres, and John was very excited and was quite keen to head to a DRS collection centre to send me loads of photos. So that's what he did over the weekend.
Oh, great. Oh, that's amazing.
So I got all these photos of the process working. I guess the thing that's interesting about Copenhagen is they've got this different fee level for different material types. So they have one Danish kroner, which is called Pant A, which is for glass bottles and aluminium cans that are less than a litre.
Okay.
They have a 1.5 Danish kroner for Pant B, which is plastic bottles less than a litre, and Danish kroner 3. So 3 Danish kroner for Pant C, which is all bottles and cans between 1 and 20 litres. So they have different levels of deposit based on the size of the container and also what it's made of.
So this is that variable fee we were talking about in the episode based on the container size.
Yeah, variable fee. And the bin that John sent me, interestingly, had a little donation slot. And basically you could put your bottle or can on that donation slot, and then someone who wanted the money could come and take that bottle and can out of that slot. It stops people going through the bins, having these little slots for you to donate your Danish kroner if you don't have time to take it back. So
amazing.
Really interesting to get all of John's insight. And I guess the bit that was correct, so the bit that wasn't correct is they're using DRS less. I think everyone still uses it just as much, if not more. Certainly the picture John sent me from the DRS centre was a massive long queue of people returning huge quantities of bottles and cans. So I didn't get any impression that it wasn't being used. But the bit that definitely was correct, and I confirmed that with him, was that move away from glass. Now it's more likely to be plastic and cans. This has inspired me. I think we need to start doing some international episodes of things that really interesting things that people have in their country that we don't have in the UK that we can talk about. If you're sat there in a country that isn't the UK thinking, I've got something to add to this conversation, can you WhatsApp me, which is available on our Facebook or Instagram? Contact us on social media, which is @rubbishpodcast. You can email us at talkingrubbishpodcast@gmail.com. And we have just launched our Discord. So the link will be in our show notes for our Discord. So there's loads of ways of getting in contact. And we'd love to start collating some international information so that we can start putting together some international episodes. Today, we're joined by Alice Rackley, who is the CEO of Polytag. Hi, Alice.
Hello, James. Hi, Robbie.
Hey, Alice.
Great to have you on the podcast.
Oh, no, thanks for having me on.
Polytag are an amazing organisation because they do what we talked about last week, these bits of data that are hidden on our packaging that can be read by UVs, and then they go to a MRF, and the MRF scans the UV or uses UV to scan the barcode and decide what type of packaging something is. So as I said earlier, if you haven't listened to episode 24, which is last week's, I'd listen to that first because it's super interesting background and probably necessary for some of the questions we're going to ask Alice in this episode. And as always with our interviews, we like to do a little giveaway. So Alice has very kindly sent me a UV torch, which is like an industrial UV torch to be able to scan these things. And we'll talk about packaging you can find these QR codes on, and then you'll be able to use this UV torch. I've also got some sample labels, which I think I'm gonna throw in. So I'm planning on posting these out. Alice, did you want to add anything into the mix?
Yes, we've got some very cool Polytag sweatshirts printed on 100% sustainable organic cotton with our logo, and they look very cool, and we'd love to see people wearing them out and about. So happy to give away one of those too.
Wow, this is a great prize. We'll put all of those on our social media. If you want to be in with the chance of winning those, you need to follow us on Instagram @rubbishpodcast and just like the post with Alice's face, and then you'll have the opportunity to win that. We, as listeners will know, in the last episode, Robbie and I got a little bit too excited about, what are we calling them? Invisible barcodes or digital watermarks? Or do you call them something? What do you call them?
We call them UV watermarks at Polytag because that's kind of what they are. They're printed using UV ink, and they're invisible to the human eye like a watermark is.
Okay, UV watermarks. We didn't say that at all last week, Robbie.
That's the only thing we didn't say, James.
It was a great episode, though. I really enjoyed it. And I love listening to all your episodes, guys. You're doing a brilliant job. It's an honour to be on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. We're trying to do interviews every 5 episodes. This is episode 25. We've stuck to that so far. So you're our 5th interview episode.
Wow.
And we like to build up our knowledge around them, which is why we did this episode last week on UV watermarks, as I will call them for this episode. So let's go straight into it. Let's start with a bit of a background to Polytag, but we really want to get into the detail quite quickly, I think, on this one, because there's so much to discuss. But just give us a bit of a background on kind of the company itself, how you started and what it's aiming to achieve.
Well, I've been the CEO of Polytag for 3 years now, but prior to that, I was developing digital solutions for retail, actually, the retail sector, which went through a digital transformation about 10 years ago. Everybody will remember like the advent of online shopping and app-based experiences. Landed a job at GS1, who are the standards agency behind the Barcode, when I left the retail sector. And it was when I was at GS1 that I realised that there was a real opportunity to use 2D codes like QR codes and data matrix to enable circular economies. And as part of the work that I was doing at GS1, I met 2 gentlemen, Phil Sutton and Brendan O'Neill, who'd got this idea for what Polytag has become. And the 3 of us have worked really well together over the last 3 years and developed the proposition that we have today and that we offer to loads of our clients. And we've got really big plans for the future.
Great.
Phil and Brendan's background is in recycling. So between me with the digital side of things and them with their recycling expertise, we've really been a good team.
Great. And so we were, I guess last week, it felt a bit like our episode was quite hypothetical. It was like, oh, we think this thing's really good and it'll be amazing if it comes in. And then towards the end of the episode, I was like, oh, just to let everyone know, this could be on your packaging right now. These, you just wouldn't know. It's invisible, right? And you were kind enough to send me this kind of UV torch and some examples, and we held them up to the camera last week, and that'll be on our social media. So if you haven't had a chance to look at those, you can see this in action. So how would people find it? I know they'd have to have a UV torch, but what kind of products are you guys in at the moment, and what range? How far reaching is it? That would be really interesting for people to hear, I think.
Sure. Polytag's really very much focused on plastics. The name Polytag is a nod to poly as in plastic, but also poly as in multi-purpose. Mm-hmm. And we have really worked with our clients to date on tagging their single-use plastic that they expect is being recycled. And we've just focused on detecting data in recycling centres to give our brand clients some information that they've never been able to see before about whether that plastic is actually being recycled or not. We often say that they can finally stop guessing and start knowing, because I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that anybody that puts single-use plastic onto the market is just hoping and guessing that it's getting recycled. But if they put these UV watermarks on their plastic, we can detect them in recycling centres now and give them that barcode level data that they need to inform their strategy and to optimise decisions they're making about single-use plastic. So
in terms of the products then, so you've got Aldi milk and Co-op water and who else are you working with?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We've started working on milks and waters to begin with. Milk's actually most interesting because they've got a really short shelf life. And so when we put tagged product or UV watermarked product that's milk onto the market, we know we should be seeing it in recycling centres, within a week or so, coming back through the system. We also are going to be targeting fresh juices with a couple of our other clients that are coming online this year. So, yeah.
And is that mostly, Alice, just because you can see the results quite quickly and it's like proof of concept stuff that, look, it comes back quite quickly and, hey, presto, it's down at the recycling centre within a sort of 20-mile radius of where the store was? Is it as simple as that?
Yes, that's one of the main drivers. The other driver is that we've got some really good relationships with the label manufacturers that sort of seem to have a specialism in the milks and water space.
Okay.
It's a whole new world, this label manufacturing business. But yeah, that's the other reason.
Great. So I was trying to find labels. I mean, I didn't have this. I had a UV torch I'd bought that was a cheap one, and you said it might not work. So maybe that was the reason. But I was trying to find some in Bristol. I went into Co-op and looked at the 2-litre water bottle, and I went into Aldi and looked at the milk, and I couldn't find them. So are they regionalised? Like, would I find that in Bristol? Are you in different regions? How many products is this on?
So at the moment, we've just done small releases onto the market in local areas where we know that we've got a detection system in the recycling centre that serves that area.
Great.
However, very exciting, from May this year, 2025, we're going to be rolling out on milk, waters and fresh juices with Ocado and Marks and Spencer's nationwide. So those two brands will be able to see at barcode level how much of their single-use plastic's actually getting recycled.
So, James, that's when we release the hounds with their UV torches to go find out what these labels are all about.
I'm ready. Look, I've got my UV torch here. I'm ready. I'm going to be walking through the M&S. That's amazing. And so, just in case someone didn't listen to last week's episode, even though we said you should listen to it, just in case they didn't, what we're talking about here is invisible barcodes on products that... So there's kind of two sides to this, aren't there? So the first thing is you need to get your invisible barcodes on the product itself. That's the first side, and that's what you're talking about there, where you're saying you've got Ocado coming up, you've got Aldi, you've got Co-op, you've got trials that are being run. So that's one side of the coin, and then the other side is this detection equipment you're calling it, which is literally a camera, and it's placed over the conveyor belt at the MRF. And what happens is the material's running down the conveyor belt, and the camera's looking for those invisible barcodes. And if it finds them, you've got a couple of things that can happen. First of all, you're counting it so that people like Co-op and Aldi know how much packaging is going through their system. But equally in the future, you could say, well, we now know this is food grade. We now know this is PET versus PP. So you can start building into that data that's on that barcode all the different things that recyclers might need to improve their recycling rates. Is that a fair summary of last week's episode?
Yeah, exactly right. So it's about first step detection. And as you say, it's a camera system and actually a sort of UV light rig inside this black box. And so all of the plastic on the plastic conveyor line in a recycling centre is fluoresced, if you like, and the codes then become visible for a moment when it's in that dark space. And that's when our camera network can grab the data out of the data matrix and feed that back to the brand account. And so, as I said, the brand then sees every moment a barcode is captured, they get that data for the first time. And
does it affect the MRF at all? Like, are they able to run the conveyor belts at the same speed? Does anything change for them?
No, nothing changes for the MRF. And we've been really keen to make sure that the kit can be easily retrofitted. And so it just sits as a little module over the conveyor system and doesn't disrupt their operation whatsoever. They don't have to slow the belt down or anything. But the secondary benefit, once we've detected the data for the brand, will be when the MRF can use those tags to enhance their sortation of the plastic. And I think you touched on that last week. So yeah, we're looking at capturing more information in the data matrix than just the barcode. So you can encode things like, is it a cosmetic grade plastic or is it food or non-food based plastic? You can encode in the data matrix what generation of plastic it's being recycled. So is it a second generation plastic or a third generation? And those pieces of information really will make a difference in terms of step-changing recycling in the future.
And then when it comes to actually the marking itself, explain a bit how they go on. Because, I mean, we sort of broadly understand how you just print a normal label. With UV inks, is it like a separate process or is it all done at the same time? How does the UV watermarking bit work?
Well, it's a great question, and we've applied the same principles as we did with the MRF. We want it to be really low disruption and part of the normal manufacturing process for the label printers. And so for those listeners who are aware of how to print labels now, it's basically like potato stamping. So they just have different stamps for each colour, and they roll them on these huge machines. So they build up the label artwork with, you know, the red ink, then the blue ink, then the black ink, then the green ink. And all we are doing is adding another colour onto that press with another potato stamp design, if you like, except this colour is invisible to the human eye. It's a UV-based ink, and it rolls on as part of the normal label printing process. So it's really low disruption, super easy for brands to do and introduce to their standard processes.
Oh, amazing. So go on then. Which bit has been the harder bit? The getting the inks onto the labels or the getting the cameras goes into these recycling facilities?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say they've both been equally challenging, but for very different reasons. However, we've had a really good breakthrough towards the end of 2024. We launched the Eco-Trace programme, which was a by the industry for the industry programme that would see brands funding the installation of these detection systems in MRFs. And unfortunately can't tell you who else is joining the programme, but as you heard there, we've got some really big brands already behind the scheme, and we're going to be able to complete the installation into the 12 largest recycling centres in the UK by July this year. And those 12 largest recycling centres give us 50% coverage of the UK's plastic
that's amazing.
That's being handled and processed. And so that becomes a really interesting, I would say, statistically significant number for brands that want to join the programme. They put these UV tags onto their single-use plastic, and then they can see 50% of the plastic that's domestically recycled in the UK coming through these MRFs that have got these systems enabled in them. So we're really getting traction now. It's been a promising start to the year.
I mean, that's genuinely fascinating, because when we talked last week about Holy Grail, and we know that's kind of different to what you guys are doing, it's more of a European and it's more of a, I would say, test at the moment. You know, if I think about what we talked about last week, there were lots of these phases that kind of seem to still be in testing. What you're saying here is in the UK, you are in a position where you will have 50% coverage of all plastic that's going through our recycling system.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a real a can-do attitude, I would say, like in terms of just getting stuff done.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Is that where we are? That like lots of people have trialed stuff and you guys are like, no, we're just going to make it work. So we get into all the MRFs and make it happen.
Yeah. We have gone through the testing and pilot process. We've actually been partnered with the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre up here in Chester, which is part of the University of Sheffield, and they have worked with us to develop this a prototype of the detection system. We did a bottle-to-bottle project, that was what it was called, back in 2022, which was sponsored by Recoup. And that's how we've gone about developing the prototype and then ruggedizing the system. And it was certified at Technology Readiness Level 9 at the end of 2023, which means it's ready for deployment into live recycling centres. And we've been really lucky with support from Biffa in particular, who were prepared to take some of the early units into their recycling centres. And the most recent one we launched was in Regen in Northern Ireland, just at the end of 2024. So yeah, we're really pleased with the support we've had from the industry, but also from development partners like the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. They've really helped us to accelerate and get to market fast.
Amazing. I have a question about a potential flaw. So apologies for this, but we've got to get into the detail. You know, this is, and I just as you were talking about printing onto labels, right? And our advice, obviously, on this podcast is keep your labels on. We've talked about that, but there will be councils out there that say, hey, remove labels and put those in the rubbish bin. And people may believe they have to remove the labels, like the lid. And so obviously what's happened with lids is they've become tethered, so harder to remove, and people are still removing them. So yeah. I guess there's a slight concern that people may remove the label. And obviously when we talked about this last week, we talked about the fact that you could emboss on the actual plastic itself, on the actual bottle. Do you have a view on this? As in obviously, luckily we've got quite a few listeners and we can say, guys, keep your labels on. It's important. And like Alice needs you to keep your labels on. But what do you say to councils who are like, just remove all that, we just want the plastic? Like, how does that work within what you're trying to create here?
Well, of course, if the label comes off at the moment, the UV watermark is on the label. And so we wouldn't be able to detect the data then in that instance. And so, yeah, we're with you. We'd love people to keep the labels on. If the labels are on the plastic, the way that the data matrix works is it has a very high error correction rate, which means that up to 30% of one data matrix can be damaged or obscured, but we could still grab all the data from it. And so we don't even need all the labels still on, or we don't need the label to be sort of intact necessarily to get some detection of the data. And then on the point of embossing, with the work that the Holy Grail Project has done, I just think we need all the help we can get. And there will never be a one silver bullet solution for detecting and sorting in recycling centres. And so there may well be other packaging types where brands do need to consider alternative marking solutions in order to get the detection and the sortation capability thereafter. Ours works really well if the label is on and we can detect just one of those data matrix. We get really, really high read rates at standard operating speed. So for those brands that that's going to work for, Polytag is something to consider. But of course, I have to say there are other marking solutions out there.
So you've been running these pilots. You're in Aldi, you're in Co-op. What is the early data telling us? What are you seeing from what's coming back? And are there any insights that you could share with listeners in terms of the recycling and what's happening out there?
So the interesting thing from the beginning is that brands have never seen this data before. And it is just worth considering for a moment. I mean, as I said, I spent my early career in retail where data is just everywhere, is king, and it's available for every possible moment in the customer journey and the supply chain. And so I found it really quite surprising when I joined the recycling space that there was so little data available to brands. So the very fact that we're collecting any barcode level data out of recycling centres is amazing. And brands are fascinated by it and the potential that it has to shape both their internal strategy and planning. What is our recycling rate targets that we're aiming at, for example? How much of our material do we want to have back and be reusing by 2030, for example? So those internal strategy and benchmarking processes are really being fueled by this data that they can now get their hands on. But of course, the data also has implications, not just for internal processes, but also how businesses will respond to new laws coming in. For example, extended producer responsibility. Because, of course, if they don't know how much of their plastic's actually being recovered, it's difficult for them to plan and think through the way that EPR will land. And so there's some really interesting use cases for this data that we might well see being discussed in more detail in the future.
Yeah, this was one of my thoughts, and we talked about it a bit last week. I'd love to get your insight on it, that this will allow brands to make recyclability claims that are actually true, as in if I always use Coke and Pepsi. I feel like I need a different example. Why can I only ever think of Coke and Pepsi? Let's say roses versus don't pick heroes because that's the same company. Let's say
Roses Quality Street.
Quality Street. Okay, so you've got two different tubs, and for whatever reason, Rose's customers are more likely to recycle, or Roses have put their recycling label in such a strong place on the front of the tub that everyone goes, oh, I know that's recyclable, and Quality Street have hidden their recycling label. Let's say these aren't true. Please don't sue me, Nestle. These are not true comments. It's just a hypothesis. So you end up with these kind of situation where, I don't know, Roses have an 80% recycling rate and Quality Street have a 20% recycling rate, but on average, the tub recycling rate is 50%, right? But actually what's happening is it's a brand skew. So there's different brands that are performing in different ways because of the comms campaigns and the way that they've labelled their product. So if that's the case, suddenly you can say, well, actually, Roses, you are 80% and Quality Street, you are 20%. And you're in a position where actually you can provide that data to the brands. Now, it would be disingenuous then for the brands to say, hey, our tubs are at a 50% recycling rate. They'd really have to be communicating their true recycling rate, which in this fake example, Roses would be very exciting and for Quality Street would not be exciting. So I'm sort of just trying to imagine how that would feel as a brand and whether you're experiencing brands excited by that opportunity to see their data or whether they're like, actually, ignorance is bliss. I'd rather not know. I'd rather not know my recycling rates. What's your feeling in terms of the market?
I won't name the brand or the person, but I did have this exact conversation where I said, for the first time ever, you could know what your recycling rate is on this particular product packaging. And the response I got back was, what if we don't like it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's massive because once you know, you've got to do something with that data. You can't pretend you don't know.
Yeah, what can you say in response to that other than get yourself some data, start knowing what's going on, and then make some decisions about how you're going to improve it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And these are great conversations to have, because then you can, and ultimately, I guess it's going to come down to competition, isn't it? If you've got a brand that's getting all this data, publishing it, showing it, and their competitor isn't, ultimately consumers might swing towards the person or the company who's being transparent, because that's what our experience is. Certainly, having done 25 episodes, that's what constantly comes into the WhatsApps and emails. Why haven't we got transparency? I've got this piece of plastic. How do I know it's going to be recycled? I literally had someone yesterday sending a Ferrero Rocher tray saying, how it says recyclable, but how will I know that it's going to be recycled? It's like, great, what a good question. This is where you would come into play and say, well, actually, we can prove for this brand that this much has been recycled. And I think brands shouldn't be afraid of transparency. We should be pushing for
Not at all, no.
It is going to come down.
You touched on it a minute ago, anti-greenwashing claims, they won't be allowed anymore.
And so it sounds like you're having more success at the moment with the retailers. Would that be fair to say, Alice? Like, who are the people who are taking this up, most quickly?
Well, yeah, we've been really, really fortunate with support from large retail brands, but that's actually a bit of a weird legacy of where Polytag started. Okay. We started out actually offering a solution for digital deposit return schemes, which, of course, are very appealing if you're a retailer. And you don't want to put reverse vending machines outside your shop, etc. And so that's where the relationships were.
So explain a little bit about how the digital DRS works then. How does that differ from a normal DRS?
So digital DRS is actually something that we can enable with our second tag format. So we've just spent the first half of this episode talking about UV watermarks, but Polytag also offers brands the opportunity to put a serialized QR code onto their packaging, and that serialized QR code can be a trigger for any app to manage and help consumers claim their deposits back.
Oh wow, so that's just like a traditional QR code that we would recognize on a piece of packaging? Yeah,
except it's a little bit smarter than a sort of standard QR code, if you like. Okay. Do you know what QR code stands for?
No, you tell me.
It's a fun fact for the listeners. QR stands for a quick response.
Oh, okay.
And basically all it does is it allows a machine to read the web address that's captured in the QR code. Yeah. And so most QR codes that we're familiar with just contain a standard web address. Yeah. Except the QR codes that we generate and manage for our clients, they will always contain the barcode number of the product. And then if the brand wants, they will also contain a unique serial number. And it's that unique serial number which an app can use to manage with confidence the fact that this is a one-time claim and to pay out the 20 pence deposit in the comfort of your own home.
Sure. And so just give us a bit of a flavour of how that means that you don't need to have all of these reverse vending machines for deposits then using those codes.
So, yeah, the idea for a digital deposit return scheme is that your standard home recycling bin, which we all use today to put our recycling outside our homes and get collected by the council, that becomes the location for you to actually dispose of your in-scope containers with a deposit on them, and then to claim the deposit within the vicinity of that bin. So I'm trying not to get too technical, but what you can do with app-based technology is you can lock the GPS location of a registered bin. Yeah. So if you, Robbie, wanted to use an app that allowed you to lock the GPS location of your recycling bin to the app, then the app would only operate if you were within a 5 or 10 metre radius of that registered home recycling bin.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And you would then need to scan a serialised QR code on pack. It had not been claimed. Mm-hmm. And those things being true, so you're within 5 metre radius of your home recycling bin, you're scanning a serialised one-time use code with a deposit return scheme app, you can then get your deposit back.
So doing your bit to redeem your deposit is just scanning it and putting it in your bin at home rather than handing it over to someone in a corner shop or in a reverse vending machine in the supermarket. Correct. And so presumably that GPS locking thing of 5 meters means if you choose not to put it in your recycling bin, you're probably littering your own verge at home because
probably.
you can't be throwing it, walking down the road and just tossing it in a river or whatever. Does that get over the littering?
Yes. I mean, if you're scanning within 5 metres of your registered bin and you're scanning a serialised code and you're using a deposit return scheme app to do it, you'd have to be a little bit of a frustrating character to then not put it in the recycling.
I'm going to use the word psychopath.
So I just have a question about that then. So if you were to, so presumably that could operate with a DRS, a normal DRS, because if someone chose not to do the digital, they could take it back to the store and use the normal DRS.
Absolutely.
I guess what happens, because one of the arguments for DRS is that it encourages. What will end up happening is there will be people who don't claim their deposits, and there will be people who then go and fish through bins to get the deposits. And that happens. I mean, that's literally the conversation we've had about Copenhagen. John was letting us know that people do go through bins getting out the cans and bottles. So what happens if I scan the digital DRS at home? Right, this is we're going to have to go through some stages here. I claim back the deposit, I put it out in my recycling, and someone decides, oh, this person's put a bottle out in their recycling that's worth 20p. I'll take that and I'll take it back to store. So it's come out of my home bin, gone back to store.
Yeah.
Would the QR code be the same for both types, so it couldn't be claimed again, or how would that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you'd need in that instance is for the reverse vending machines to be using the QR code as the trigger to pay out the deposit.
Same QR code, yeah.
And actually, when Scotland were about to go live with DRS, one of the requirements for the reverse vending machine manufacturers were that they needed to be able to retrofit 2D scanners into the machine. So they were already thinking ahead to this future scenario where QR codes would be on pack and would be the trigger for paying out deposit.
Yeah, and it wouldn't just be based on size and shape, which is what kind of most old school reverse vending machines use, is it?
Yeah, you could just use or you could use a combination of all three, so size, shape, plus the serialised QR code to give real assurance as to who's claiming the deposit.
That's very interesting. And so just to summarise, because we've got down a QR rabbit hole, which is great because I love rabbit holes, but I just want to make sure we're clear for the listeners exactly what we're talking about here. So we've started off talking about UV watermarks, which are the invisible watermarks on a label. We don't see those as consumers, and they are specifically for MRFs to sort and recycle. And we've moved into QR codes, which are visible. So you would have a single QR code on the label that a customer could scan, and that would allow digital DRS. It would also allow I know you use them for communications around recycling to say, put this in this bin, keep the label on, all those kind of things. So there's two things that you're focused on here, the invisible and the visible.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, yeah.
And I just wanted to make that distinction very clear because, I don't want people to think they have to scan the invisible one somehow. And everyone's going to have a UV torch at home.
I know. Yeah, we are distinctly offering two different solutions, you're right, to summarise that, James. But the thing about QR codes, I mean, I'm going to sound like a QR code geek for a moment, but they are absolutely fantastic tools because not only, as you just said, will they be scannable to take you to a landing page for that product barcode number, so you can talk about the recycling processes that consumers need to follow in order to get that packaging recycled correctly. But they can also be scanned by any app. And in the case of digital deposit return scheme, it would be a digital deposit return scheme app that would scan that same QR code in order to go through that process we've talked about, paying that 20 pence or whatever it is back to the consumer. The QR codes will also be scanned at checkout from 2027. And so if you follow GS1 and any of the other POS providers, they're all gearing up to retire the stripy barcode that we know and love and replace it with a QR code. And then that same QR code can also be scanned throughout the supply chain as well. So it's really, really multifunctional, single feature on a label that has got the power to unlock all sorts of very, very cool direct-to-consumer comms, app-based processes and supply chain benefits.
And so those are two absolutely fantastic technologies. The third one would be some sort of AI optical reading of packaging that doesn't have any labeling on it. It's just reading easy to find the plastic Coca-Cola bottle, probably. Not so easy to find other niche packaging formats unless you've got multiple pictures of it in a database or whatever. So why is digital watermarking or QR codes better? What are the limitations between those? Why didn't you just go down the Uber camera route? Why do you think marking is so important, I suppose, is the question.
First thing to say is, as I mentioned earlier, I think we need loads of solutions. So there's not one single bullet, and there are really good examples of where AI, which is where you've got an image file of a particular piece of packaging that you can use to identify and detect packaging in a recycling centre. I think, there is really good use cases for that in certain circumstances. But as you mentioned, it's actually quite a time-consuming process to put all of these photographs of each piece of packaging together and use them to sort of recall when you're detecting in MRFs. And so that's the beauty of a code. It's machine readable very, very quickly. And because the codes that we use are a global standard, you can plug our machine into China and it would start detecting Chinese packaging without needing to know what the packaging looked like, without needing an image file library. So it's very, very scalable technology. And when you're using global standards, I think, there's a sidebar here, isn't there, about global standards being absolutely essential to enable these circular economies. Circular economies depend on many different stakeholders exchanging data seamlessly, speaking the same language, if you like. And that's why if you've got a standard that is common through that circular supply chain, you've got a much, much better chance of it working. And so we're a massive believer in GS1 standards here at Polytag. It's a critical foundation point to the solution that we've developed.
That's amazing. Thank you, Alice. And thank you for your time. Time has flown today. I don't know about you, but I'm like, whew, I feel like I've been here for like 5 minutes, but I've just been so wrapped up in the conversation. It's gone so fast. So thank you for giving us your time. We always end with the same question. So,
I love this question.
Great. So that means you've thought about it. That's brilliant. So we always end with the same question, which is, if you had an environmental superpower, what would it be and how would you use it?
I talk about this with my kids quite a lot, actually. Do you ever watch Inspector Gadget?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I wish I had Inspector Gadget capabilities with a litter picking arm and a washable bag that I had on me at all times, because I'm often out with the kids on the beach or walking in the mountains, and I really want to pick stuff up and take it away and put it in the right bin. But I don't have the correct equipment, and it just annoys me beyond belief. I'd often think about, Gareth Morton at Eco Surety.
Yes.
What a legend. And in terms of individual impact, the amount of bags of rubbish that guy has picked up over the years, does a great job of putting it on LinkedIn. Yeah, so I think my superpower would be more Gareth Morton with Inspector Gadget, litter picking and bags.
Gareth's going to love that call out. Gareth is a colleague of ours who loves litter picking. He loves walking in mountains.
He's brilliant.
He does an amazing job, and I happen to know he inspires lots of people, because loads of people have said to me, I saw Gareth and it inspired me to go litter picking.
Oh, that's great.
So I love the Inspector Gadget thing. So this would I can imagine it. I've sort of imagined you with a hat on with an umbrella, not the umbrella. I've imagined you with a hat on with propellers coming out so you can fly, and then you're kind of flying down to the rubbish. Is this the vibe?
And then the litter picker would shoot out from my jacket sleeve.
Yeah, nice.
Just there when you need it. Yeah. And then there'd also be this huge washable bag that I could fill with litter.
Yes. And then you'd be sort of flying over the mountain, but like with a bag that's huge, just trailing behind you, full of litter. Yeah. Amazing.
And then obviously I'd sort it into the correct recycling bin, because I live in Wales and we've got 7,
Wouldn't you just tip it all onto the belt at the MRF, and then the digital watermarks could all be read automatically, and it would all go into the right container and get recycled?
Nailed it,
What
Robbie.
we're thinking, as it goes in the bag, it prints the watermark on. It's like, I know. It's like, this is...
Stop it.
That's great. We like to evolve these
Getting better and better.
This is good. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for that. Alice, I'm sure everyone listening is, because it's such a good build on last week's episode. And honestly, I love this topic because I think it's something that we as consumers don't necessarily experience. We don't know it exists. And yet the recycling industry talks about it all the time. And so it's great for this podcast to be able to tell people about it and explain how it works, and that they may be buying packaging today that has this, and certainly in a few months they'll be buying packaging from Ocado that definitely has this, and I'll be looking out for that with my UV torch. So I really, really appreciate you coming on and explaining it in more detail and what Polytag do. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
As always, if you want to be part of the conversation, make sure you're following us at Rubbish Podcast. You can email talkingrubbishpodcast@gmail.com or join our Discord, and the link for that will be in our show notes, and we can all be part of the discussion. Alice, if you're kind enough to join our Discord, that would be great. I think should we create like a little interview section so that if people have thoughts, you are there directly so you can respond to them.
Very cool.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Okay. That's going to encourage people to join that. So in our show notes, you'll find the link for that, and Alice will be in our interview section ready to answer questions. So thank you for that. Amazing. All right. See you all next week. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.